Okay, and we should be live now. Forge gang! I'm still a heart man! Let's go! Alright, so a couple of weeks ago I reviewed the Thundercats 1985 to 1989, and I talked about it. It was produced by Rankin Bass and an Asian Japanese company that also did some of the animation works as well. Asia Pacific Company, or I don't know what the Japanese name of it is, but anyways, Thundercats produced a very successful toy line and several 1980s video games for the Commodore 64 and the original Nintendo. And I think it was also on the Sega Genesis. I'm not for sure. Thundercats also had a comic line, or a comic line as well, that it released, and I think it could have continued into the early 1990s. It ended in September of 1989 at Season 4, Episode 20, The Book of Omens. But anyways, I'm not here to talk about that series. I already talked about it. It should be in my... If you go to my ImperatorOfForge channel and you look through my videos, I did like about a 35-minute review on that. This is going to be about the 2011 to 2012 Cartoon Network reboot. The Cartoon Network reboot, which I don't think was as good as... I don't think it was quite as good as the original Thundercats 1980s Boomer version. The main difference is that the 85 Thundercats was very lively. It had some humor qualities, and it kind of gave some moral lessons and moral clarifications and stuff. The 2011 Thundercats is a bit darker. It actually discusses themes like death and life and stuff, and there's actual punches. You do see fights. What I did notice is they actually do say death instead of just destroy or perish, and you do see them throwing punches, like people get punched in the face. You see them fighting. It's definitely a lot more action-oriented, and it's more for an older audience base, and it definitely has some differences. So, right fast, Rick Perry says, Forge Gang. Rick Perry says, hardness abounds and abides in chat. That's right! Interdimensional Lizard says that is correct. Rick Perry says, it always comes back. It's a perennial classic like He-Man. Well, I think He-Man, I'm going to do He-Man when I finish Thundercats, by the way, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. We'll get to have all the fun. And what I might actually do, I was going to divide the 85 Thundercats up season by season, but I just decided to only just review the entire show instead of each season separately. What I might do is I might review He-Man by season, since He-Man was more popular and garnered a higher audience and ratings, as well as a more successful toy line. But it also came earlier, so it also got to have some bigger head and clout than the Thundercats did. But yeah, He-Man has had two revivals, 2002 and 2022. Let's see here. Interdimensional Lizard says that is correct. Sam says hi. Hey Sam, what's up? Evangeline Mayalera, or Evangeline Mayalera, said hi. Hello there, Evangeline. Evangeline, how are you doing? Rick Perry says the original couldn't be matched. It's an atmosphere. a field that can't be duplicated in post-modernity. So I want to talk about the 2011 Thundercats reboot, and it is based on the 1985 to 89 Thundercats. But first, there was a string of a couple of comic book strips, and there was also crossovers of the Thundercats with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and with the X-Men and some Marvel and DC characters. There was also, I think, a crossover with Spider-Man. In 2002, 2003, there was a revival series of classic Thundercat comics that also came out. And in the late 2000s, the late aughts, there was discussions of a movie, a live-action movie reboot to come out, or a CGI movie of the Thundercats, but it never happened. So from 1989, aside from some Toonami bloopers in the 90s and early aughts, to 2011, there was no serious attempt to revive the Thundercats. But finally, Warner Brothers finally pitched the idea. Now, something about the 2010s is that it was an attempt to try to reutilize or revive 1980s shows, because there was an attempt of 1980s nostalgia or 80s nostalgia in the in the 2010s. It was just a time of nostalgia. But I will tell you this: if the 1980s was the beginning and birth of action cartoons, the early 2010s was the death of it. Because by the 2010s, even before the 11 Thundercats came out, action cartoons were on a downward spiral, and they were going into decline. So anyways, regardless, in 2011, Cartoon Network and Warner Brothers decided to make a new toy line series, a new set of toy lines, and also to make a new reboot of the Thundercats. They decided to make it darker, and instead of episodic storylines or plot lines, they made it more deeper, and they turned it more into an epic narrative. And they brought back pretty much all the classic villains of old. They got some new names and redesigns. In the original Thundercats, Lion-O was basically a 12-year-old kid in an adult body. But in the 2011 reboot, he is already a young adult or a teenager. He's either a teenager or a young adult. They did something which I thought was pretty stupid. They made Tigra his adopted older brother. And King Claudius, interestingly, Groon the Destroyer and King Claudius, or Claudius, actually appear. Groon the Destroyer was a ghost in the original Thundercats, and he was already dead and had been dead forever. And he just came back as a evil spirit or a warring spirit. But he is now portrayed as alive, and he is a traitor. He betrays Thundera. In the 85 Thundercats, Thundera was a planet that was destroyed or blew up because of the Sword of Plundar being tossed into the core by Jaga, and the planet blowing up several decades later when Jaga was older. But in this 2011 reboot, Thundera is not its own planet. Instead, it's a city or a kingdom on Third Earth. And Third Earth is divided into these different animal species kingdoms. There's elephants and reptilians and catmen and dogmen and so on and so forth. Rick Perry says that He-Man met Superman. DC made the mini-comics that originally came with the Mattel figures. Yeah, I think Mattel was also the ones that made the 1980s Thundercat toy sets. Let's see here. Solar Sebastiafosifua says hi. Hey there, Sebastian. Solar Sebastia Sofia. Let's see here. Gorion Flaco says that since 1989, D's nuts have been divine. Rick Perry says that nothing of any worth occurred after 2012 at the latest. And Rick Perry says, do the Robert Burbles show up? They do. They're just called Burbles in the 2011 reboot, Rick Perry. But anyways, they did a lot of horrible things with this show. Okay? When I talked about the 1985 Thundercats, I glorified and basked in its epic greatness and all of its splendidness. But this reboot, there is a lot of mistakes in this reboot. So anyways, Claudius is an older man. Oh, by the way, the voice of King Claudius is the voice of the original Lion-O from the 85 Thundercats. I guess as an indication that he's passing the torch. What was his name? Jared Drummy or something. But anyways, Mum-Ra is in the form of Panthro, and he stabs and kills King Claudius. The episodes are basically, what is it? The Sword of Omens 1 and 2, and it's about how the reptilians take over and destroy the cat's lair and the kingdom of Thundera. They besiege and destroy it, and Lion-O, Chitara, Tigra, Wily Kit, Wily Cat, and stuff basically escape. Jaga is captured and imprisoned in a magic lantern by Mum-Ra, and they have to go find the Book of Omens. So the Book of Omens didn't appear until Season 3. In this reboot, the Book of Omens almost immediately makes a reappearance. There are some themes and continuity, but there's a lot of differences. It's a much more serious and darker tone, and it was set up for failure. The Thundercats 2011 reboot was set up for a failure because it was put in the Friday night time slot, and it was put rather pretty late at night, and it was also targeted for an older audience, generally a older teen, kind of a younger teen to young adult demographic. And also there was some nostalgia vibes that was being pushed about it as well. And then they made their toy lines with their new 2011-2012 toy lines. They focused only on a younger demographic, which means that they had set themselves up for failure. They set themselves up for failure, and that's exactly what happened. If you remember, in the 1960s, Star Trek was on Friday night, and Star Trek, believe it or not, actually almost failed in terms of air ratings because it was on Friday night. So anyways, there is also a Japanese studio that was used to do the animation of the reboot. The original 1985 Thundercats and the 2011 reboot were both animated in Japan and were made by a Japanese company. And one of the reasons for why this series failed as it did has to do with that, by the way. I'll get to that in a little bit. So, the story narrative is pretty interesting. It is an epic narrative. It is much more serious. The characters do talk about death, and they talk about dying instead of only destroy. And there is guns and firearms instead of just laser or taser weapons like in the original. And you do see the characters punch each other in the face or in the torso or the elbow. This wasn't allowed in the 80s action cartoon shows, but they do it in this reboot. There isn't really too much to really say about the reboot. Mum-Ra has had a pretty big redesign in both his Decayed and Mum-Ra, the Ever-Living form. The Sword of Omens is essentially the same thing. It's not too different. Tigra is the adoptive older brother of Lion-O. Lion-O becomes the king of the Thundercats when his father dies, and he is at first very cocky and kind of arrogant. There is a lot of grays that are portrayed, or a lot of shades of gray that is portrayed in this series. The animation style is actually really good for what it's worth. It was pretty well done overall, but anyways, I did enjoy that Groon the Destroyer got more of an important role to play, but I'm going to go into why this reboot series was not as good as the original. And I'm going to tell you why the series was not as great. First of all, Tigra, who in the original was portrayed as this very wise and incredibly austere and mature architect builder, he is a cocky, teenage, rage-driven, arrogant prick who kind of tends to try to bully or usurp Lion-O's authority and stuff. And Chitara is in this love triangle relationship, which is very bizarre for a children's cartoon from the 2010s. There is this thing where Chitara says that she is in love with Lion-O and she likes him, and then she goes right over and falls for Tigra, and that she actually likes Tigra more than Lion-O, and it's very weird. So you have a love triangle relationship like in Robotech, the Micros arc. It's really such an offsetter. The love triangle is a major offsetter to me. You have this thing where Mum-Ra, the Ever-Living, has taken over several animal species and is traveling around the universe and is trying to collect the Power Stones or the Power Talismans. And Lion-O's ancestor puts him or entraps him in a giant sarcophagus, and then they crash land on Third Earth, and the different animal species, each of them takes a Power Stone, and they go and they found new kingdoms, and the Sword of Omens is made from the War Power Stone. The birds have the Tech Stone, and the rats have the Sword of Plundar, and it's just very bizarre and weird. The character redesigns in the animation was decent. The music wasn't really that great. The musical score is nothing worth remembering. The musical score from the 1985 Thundercats is much better. Much, much more substantially better than the 2011 musical score. The storytelling is kind of off. It feels like the production was rushed. The character actors just don't really sink in with the voice actors don't really sink in with their characters that well. And there's also woke. There's a marginal bit of woke stuff in it. Issues such as racism and social justice and racial prejudice of the cats towards the reptilians, and Lion-O trying to stop the reptiles from being executed by the Cat Guard or the Thunderian Guard, and just this thing about racial prejudice and social justice is in it. It's not too woke, but the woke stuff is there. It is present in the 2011 reboot, and it's very nauseating. It was actually the episodes. It was actually the episodes in the middle of the first season that I enjoyed the most, that I thought had the best storytelling. There was one story, instead of like Hammerhand, they have a fish man, like a fish pirate guy that's hunting this monster in a sand sea or something. So they replaced Hammerhand with that guy. They got Rattilla, who's trying to get this the sword and gauntlet of Plundar. The character redesigns are pretty unusual and weird, but they do have mech and robots, and it feels a lot like Titan, Teen on Titan. It feels a lot like Titan or whatever. What is it called? Not the animation does look a lot like the 2000 Teen Titans, and the features and adventures are a lot like the Teen Titans, and it makes it pretty stupid. It's not that great. The irony is that this show, it had 2 million viewers at the beginning of it, and then by episode 26, What Lies Above Part 2, that's the last episode of season 1, almost nobody was watching it. It was on a Friday night, and few people were really watching it, and after the run of the first season ran for 26 episodes. There was a toy line series here and there that didn't really do very well. And the toys were not selling, and so they canceled the show. First, they put the 2011 cartoon series onto hiatus. And then by early 2013, it was confirmed that the show had been canceled by Cartoon Network. One video game for the Nintendo Nintendo DS, I apologize. One 2011 Thundercat video game for the Nintendo DS did come out. Nintendo DS. There might have been another game or something, but as far as I'm aware, there's only one Nintendo DS video game, and that's it. That's really the legacy of the Thundercats 2011 series. It definitely is a lot more action-oriented and a lot more epic-driven. There is more character developments, and there's definitely a bit more nuances to what is going on. There is definitely some deeper lore, but does it really make it better than the 1985 to 1989 Thundercats? I would say no. And it's not entirely the fault of the producers of this show. It's not entirely the fault of the producers of the 2011 Thundercats. By the early 2010s, streaming was becoming much more important overall. Streaming services became a lot more common by the 2010s, and most audiences and most people were leaving legacy television behind, legacy satellite television, and going to streaming services. And so that's one thing that took away its audience. One of the things that took away the audience were the streaming services, and the failure of the toy lineups, the failure of like the toys and stuff. They did not get a younger audience or a new fan audience into the Thundercats. And so that was another factor, and stuff like Chitara's love triangle relationship with Tigra and Lion-O just was so stupid. Also, Snarf doesn't talk in the 2011 reboot. I figured you probably want to know that Snarf doesn't even talk. Snarf just makes, like, weird kitten noises, and that's about it. And Wily Kid and Wily Cat are twins. They escaped and ran away from home, and they lived off the streets pickpocketing and stuff. And Chitara was part of the clerics and worked with Jaga. And yes, Jaga does die in the series. There's also There's also some episodes like the old Lion-O anointment trials from the original. It's just called The Trials of Lion-O Part 1 and Part 2. Like I said, the middle episodes were the best of the series, and that's pretty interesting. Usually it's the episodes at the beginning or end of the season that are the best. But with this reboot, the episodes about the middle of the first season were the best ones and had the best storytelling, but the episodes at the beginning and end are not that great, and you can just tell it was rushed. Anyways, some concepts were leaked on Reddit about what they were planning to do with Season 2, and if you would like me to talk about those, what they were planning to do for Season 2, I'll definitely tell you. But anyways, because of the failure of the toy line and the shortcomings of the show, Cartoon Network put Thundercats 2011 to 2012 on temporary hiatus around June of 2012. That's when episode 26, What Lies Above Part 2, was played. And then by 2013, it was confirmed at 2013-2014 Comic-Con that the 2011 Thundercats had been canceled. Now, ironically, it was actually put at the 2:30 a.m. lineup on Toonami. It actually was put on the Toonami midnight lineup, and it actually was more successful when it had its rerun on Toonami than it did on its original run. Also, another factor of why the Thundercats was canceled, as I had said earlier, a lot of the animation was produced in Japan, and in 2011 there was the Fukushima tsunami. The Fukushima tsunami was a completely horrible natural disaster. The 2011 tsunami in Japan and the Fukushima disaster is what also caused a bankrupt or a disruption in the animation process of the 2011 Thundercats. And also, the yen went up, and there was this inflation of the yen, and because of that overinflation of the yen of Cartoon Network stocks in Japan, the Japanese decided to abandon continuing to animate. So one of the biggest, if not the biggest, animation studio contractors for Thundercats weren't even animating the series. So that was another reason why they canceled it. But lack of interest in toy sales also stopped it. And it was during the reruns on Toonami, the reruns in the mid-2010s, late 2010s, that an older audience, an older fan base actually watched the 2011 Thundercats, and those are the people that actually liked it. That's actually pretty interesting, that there's actually a show that got no following during its original run, and then got a cult following after it had its rerun on Toonami and other stations. That's pretty interesting. But anyways, yeah. So the story it's decent, especially the midway episodes. The episodes at the beginning and end are not that great. They're not that fantastic to watch. I probably would go back and watch the 2011 Thundercats again. I'm not going to lie. It's not bad. It's not as bad as a lot of critics say it is, but it's not great. And it is definitely, least of all, anything comparable to the original 85 Thundercats. Yes, the cheesy dialogue isn't there like in the 85 Thundercats. Yes, it's a bit deeper and more nuanced, but they kind of mess the characters up. They ruin the development of the characters. They kind of, in a way, attack the characters and attack the storytelling points. And it's just, why are they going around collecting the Power Stones with the Book of Omens? And what is the purpose for why they are fighting or trying to stop Mum-Ra? The greater plot is just not really reflected very well. And maybe they would have gone deeper into Season 2 with that kind of stuff, but they did not. So, overall, I give it a 4 out of 10. So I, ImperatorOfForge, give the 2011 to 2012 Thundercats reboot a 4 out of 10. In many respects, actually, I give it, and that's at its best. In many respects, I don't even really think it just needs a 3 out of 10. So, at its best, and I mean by its best, the episodes in the middle, 4 out of 10. All the rest of it, just maybe a 3 out of 10. Not really that great. So, yeah, that's my review of it. Anyways, what are your thoughts about the Thundercats 2011 reboot? Let's see here. I'm trying to go back. Let's see here. Bill Cosby says, "What are you talking about, Wallace? LOL." Let's see here. Do the Robert Burbles show up? They do, but they're just robots that build things. They have no personalities whatsoever, like in the original. They show up all the way in episode 9. They have no personalities, and they rebuild Panthro's robot arms, and they build a new Thunder Tank, and that's really about it. There's also a robot conquistador that tries to colonize the Burbills and enslave them and colonize them. There's a lot of colonization and slavery and colonialism and racism rhetoric in the Thundercats, and some very early 2010s woke stuff, but yeah. Rick Perry says, listening though. Verdanian says, let's do the movie reviews, WH. Which ones? Rick Perry says, interesting review. 80s cheese adds to the wholesomeness. Noise. Spock the Roger Waters on the phone in the early 90s. Oh, spoke to Roger Waters on the phone in the early 90s. Met interesting people. That's interesting, Rick. We have both had interesting lives. Yep. That's how I know him. Have you seen The Ninth Gate? He's like a wizard. Run. Still tune into Alan occasionally. Skiz. Let's see here. Let's see here. Skiz. He seems like a decent chap. You know him? He had a bad childhood, I believe. I was connected to Alan Moore, although also through Bernard King, rest in peace. It was dissident. I know Pat Mills connected through Nathaniel Harris. Sam Slade. Left was dissident in the 70s and 80s. Are you kidding me, dude? The left had almost half of the entire world under communism in the late Cold War. Let's see here. There is a Thundercats graphic comic in the 80s. I like Scream. I was a weird kid. I have to go all the way back. I was a weird kid. 2000 AD was amazing. A slutty Chitara. Yes. An angsty Tigra. Yeah, they destroyed the characters. They really did destroy the plot of the Thundercats series. I'm reading through your comments. Yeah, anyways, I've been your host, ImperatorOfForge. If you want to, I'll talk a bit about the Thundercats comics later. Anyways, this has been my review of the 2011 to 2012 Thundercats. Not overall really great. If you are a Thundercats fan, you could give it a watch. It's a 3 out of 10. it's a bit of a hit and miss. Next time, I will do Thundercats Roar 2020. Thank you for watching. Stay hard!